Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Basics podcast, the only podcast out there that is 100% anti-burpee that I'm aware of.
There might be a few others.
A few, yeah, maybe. We'll have to. The only one that's come out and said it.
Yeah,
So,
loudly.
yeah, exactly. Dylan, it's good to see you as always. I think before we get into any of the real serious topics for the day, I think we just need to update people, and well, I'm going to update you on the big move that's happening with your boy over at Chipotle. So, if we have any, your boy, the CEO of Chipotle, is leaving, and he's heading over to Starbucks, so he can't hurt us anymore.
That's devastating.
Well, no, I think that's good. I think that's a good
I
thing.
love Chipotle.
Right, right. But he is the guy responsible for
The small
the small
portions.
portions.
Oh, so they're okay. All right.
So, and Starbucks wants some of that. So if I know you're not a Starbucks guy, I could mess around with a vanilla bean every once in a while, but I don't really go to Starbucks all that often. So I think we're safe. I think he's somewhere that he can no longer hurt us.
Yeah, as long as he doesn't mess with the pumpkin spice latte.
Oh, really?
For all of my coffee snobbery, I will fuck with a Starbucks pumpkin spice latte in just a
That
few months.
that is I didn't know that about you,
Yeah,
but
big time.
we're learning. All right, let's I'm going to turn it over to you for the hot topic of the day.
Yeah, man, I've seen this all over. This is wild. So there's this thing circulating. I don't know if it's. I saw it on Instagram. Then I Googled it. It's all over like Reddit. I'm sure had its moment on TikTok as well. But people are pushing something and calling it the poor man's Ozempic. And that thing is actually something we've mentioned before on the podcast in an episode where we talked a lot about the health benefits of fiber. And it's psyllium husk.
So what they're saying, and this is like such a perfect internet thing where it's like let's find this really obscure thing and just make it, we're going to bump it up in the mainstream. So now Psyllium Husk, as the kids would say, is having a moment, and it's being called, yeah, the poor man's Ozempic. So, I mean, you obviously, like, you've talked about it a bunch of times, how much you are pro fiber and all of the different benefits that fibrous supplements like psyllium husk can have. So is this a big day for you? Are you celebrating?
Well, what's happened here is, somebody thinks they've come up with something clever. They figured out how to package it in a good way, and they probably went viral and got famous for it.
Right.
Psyllium husk is nothing like Ozempic. Psyllium husk is a soluble fiber. It's commonly used for like being bulk forming, so helping you take better poops when you poop. And it's an active ingredient in like Metamucil, which is an over-the-counter fiber supplement. And the claim is absurd, but
Yeah.
obviously. And for those that don't know, Ozempic is a GLP-1 agonist. It's really popular right now. Was primarily used for a long time as a diabetes drug and has gained popularity due to its appetite suppression benefits and is being used more now for managing weight, for treating obesity, which is a weird thing to say because obesity has never really been like a condition that's treatable per se, but is now being prescribed to people who are struggling with obesity. And so you have these GLP-1 agonists like Ozempic that are essentially what they do is suppress your appetite. And what's interesting about this, while it's totally bullshit, right? Like it absolutely does not act like Ozempic in any way,
Right.
but fiber's satiable, right? Like it fills you up. And so a lot of people will recommend a higher fiber, higher protein diet for its satiety producing effects because it ultimately should lead to a person eating less food. And that's the problem with, hyper palatable foods is they're really engineered to do the opposite, to make you eat more and more and more of them. So I can see where they're getting this stretch, right? Put a little psyllium husk in your smoothie, you're increasing the fiber, maybe it'll make you fuller and therefore you'll eat less. I think it's generally good advice to eat more fiber.
Right.
If this is how we have to package it to do that,
Yeah.
okay, I don't know.
Right. It's such a funny one because like the message, like the ultimate message behind it, which is fiber and via psyllium husk is potentially good for weight loss. Like that's not a wrong statement. And so, the education is good. It's good that people are hearing this information. But the package in which it's coming in, which is comparing it to one of the craziest I mean, I call it a breakthrough, call it whatever you want, like, but one of the most recent, like, most effective, like, weight loss solutions, in recent memory, is just ridiculous. And you understand why it's just viral. It's catching this viral moment, and so I just think comparing the two is a complete apples and oranges thing. Psyllium husk is food. It's
Right.
plant. It's naturally derived. It is going to it's fiber. It's going to like make you. It's going to absorb water and make you feel more full. And through that process, you have the potential to lose weight. Is a medication that you are injecting into your body, and it is designed to suppress your appetite through those receptors.
In your
One,
brain.
right,
Right.
right, exactly. By influencing these receptors in your brain. So they do two totally different things. The people that are potentially right for Ozempic and the people that might want to mix in some psyllium husk into their diet, it's like just two totally different sections of people. So it's just a humorous. It just shows exactly where we're at with virality and with health and wellness on the internet. So this is like truly a hilarious. And this is an article. This is an article
Yeah.
that was written. Now was based off of it references some viral videos on social media, but like this was on Healthline. So
Yeah.
like this is a legitimate resource.
Yeah. And the drug itself, Ozempic, these GLP-1 agonists, they work for weight loss. Like we know that. There's countless studies now that show, I think the article references that people who take it lose somewhere around 15 to 20% of body weight over the course of 6 months.
Yeah.
So it's really effective at suppressing these appetite centers of your brain and helping people lose weight. Fiber's not going to do that, right? Like
Right. Exactly.
it's a good health habit. It can certainly help with feelings of fullness, lead to people eating a bit less, but not in the way that Ozempic does. And the other really important thing to note here is like a little bit of psyllium husk fiber can be very good for you. Too
Yeah.
much can be a
A
disaster.
lot's
Like
good. A lot is
you
gonna
could be
mess
barfing,
you
you could be
up.
shitting your pants,
Yeah.
you could be farting like crazy. Like there's an optimal dose in that too. And so if people are scrolling through TikTok,
Right.
seeing that taking psyllium husk is going to help them lose a whole bunch of weight. One, it's not in the same way that Ozempic does, and two, they're going to be spending a lot of time on the toilet.
Yeah, exactly. So if you are looking to lose weight, then, some psyllium husk is something that you could could try out, but long term, there are certainly some bigger rocks, and this actually blends really well into the main topic for the day, and we're gonna talk to the people about the 80-20 principle. And, this is something that I think, we've mentioned it just kind of casually over a number of different episodes. It's something that, I think if you're looking to live a balanced and still like really happy and full, successful life, understanding the 80-20 principles that we're going to outline here are really, really important. And so we just wanted to take a little bit of time to decipher between, and really because there are the 80/20 principles, look at two different sides of it. So actually, I'll just turn it over to you, Dylan, because you're always good at introducing this stuff.
Yeah, and if you're following the world of health and fitness, you've probably been swallowing down a million different influencers suggesting that there's a million different rules you could follow to be healthy and to be fit. Never drink alcohol, avoid sugar, do all the cardio in the world, never do cardio, only lift weights. Like it gets so incredibly confusing. And I think these rules, these are the only ones that really matter. This is about big rocks, like you mentioned. And so, as you noted, we've mentioned the 80/20 principle, and you'll note we're going back and forth between singular principle and principles, because I think there's really two ways we want to introduce it and think about it. But the one that we are commonly referring to when we talk about it on the podcast is simply to try to make the best or the better decision 80% of the time.
Hmm.
4 out of every 5 times, get it right. The other time, give yourself some grace, right? You're going to make some mistakes. And so that's one way to think about this. The other is a common principle in everything from business to you name it, but it very much applies to the world of health and fitness as well, and that's the Pareto Principle, which suggests that 80% of the results come from 20% of the efforts.
Hmm.
So another way to think about it is it's these big rocks, right? Let's get the most important 20% right, and that's going to lead to 80% better than you were before, versus thinking about things like supplements or cutting out sugar altogether. So if we can get it right 80% of the time, and further, if we can do really, really well 20% of the time, that's how we see the greatest benefit when it comes to diet, to fitness, to mindset, to recovery, to you name it. And so through those two lenses, I think we want to talk about how we apply that and why it's so important, and how the people listening can perhaps not only consider this as like this theoretical, way of doing things, but really to implement it and apply it to your own life.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about it within the context of health and wellness. So, like you said, we're going to go over the diet, we're going to go over the fitness, and then like that mindset and recovery aspect. But this is really something that people can look at for lots of things in their lives. The Pareto principle. He was an Italian economist, I believe, and he came up with this principle because he realized that 80%, and this was back in the late 1800s, and he realized that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the people, the population. And then also, when he was in his garden, he realized that 20% of the plants were producing 80% of the produce. And so, this is something that it's not a mathematical formula. This isn't science, but this is a principle that you can apply to all these different places in your life. And so, I guess the first place that we should start is with diet, because that's the one that we've talked about most on the show. And so, really what we're trying to do here is 80% of the time have a relatively clean diet. Like you said, to kick this all off, anybody that's telling you to never drink alcohol, to never touch carbs, to never eat meat, if it's never, then, you're already going to, you're going to be behind the eight ball here. So 80% of the time we stick to our, relatively clean eating habits. So whole foods, as little like minimally ultra processed foods as possible. And then 20% of the time go nuts. If you do that more often than not, 4 out of every 5 days, you're going to make progress. You're going to, you're going to have a pretty healthy diet.
Yeah, and it gives you give yourself some grace, right? Like As soon as you start getting into these very extreme dieting habits, it just becomes really difficult to stick to. And it becomes like this mental challenge as well, where like every time you are tempted or can't resist the temptation that you feel like you need to be, you're beating yourself up. Or we often see binge restrict, right? So people will be so restrictive that the thing that often happens next is this massive binge, which is incredibly unhealthy. So just find the balance, right? Like in the morning when I have breakfast, I typically have a big smoothie. For lunch, I'll probably have, some eggs, maybe a little bit of vegetable, a couple pieces of toast. For dinner, I'll have some protein, some vegetables, and a starch, and then I have a big fucking bowl of ice cream. And like that's great. That's how sort of I apply this in my own life. And it's not a trade-off thing either, which I think sometimes comes into play here where it's like people will start to associate making good decisions, giving them an opportunity then to make bad ones. There are no bad ones, right? Like all of them are good. I eat the ice cream because I enjoy it and I'm going to sit down after a tough day of work and it provides a different maybe value beyond the nutritional value that people are often looking for with their food. So really important to figure out ways to implement this into your own life, into your own eating habits, not only for your diet, but for your mental well-being. Like we have to
Mm-hmm.
stop being so obsessed with finding the fad diet, with finding the thing to follow in the moment. Those things are motivating in the short term. People dive head over heels into them, and then the same thing always happens, right? They fall off of the deep end. They go back to their old habits, and they're worse off than they were before. So how do we implement this balance? We do it through this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a way that I think is really helpful for a lot of people is to think about it instead of it being a daily fight. Zoom out and think about it more on like the weekly and the monthly because if you are someone, a lot of people don't have a ton of issue eating clean during the week. If they're in their structure, if they, have, they're going to work, they're going to the gym, they go home, cook dinner, Monday through Friday, maybe it's pretty easy. But then, what happens is, well, Wednesday night is, kickball league or volleyball, whatever. And so they're eating chicken wings and, having a couple pitchers of beer. And if you are looking at it just from a daily perspective, then maybe that day instead of it being 80-20 was closer to 50-50. Well, that doesn't mean that you're fucked. It just means that you're going to have to earn that back at some point during the week. So maybe if Wednesday is a night when you tend to go out and you're going to have beer and pizza. You're going to your calories might be a little bit higher than they normally would. Then another day in that week, maybe you're making up for it. You're having dinner and you're just drinking water all day. No sodas during the day, and then no after work beers. Maybe that's how you spend Monday and Tuesday because that Wednesday is going to be closer to 50-50, so that those other days have to be more 90-10. And so when you start to look at it on a weekly basis and monthly basis, it becomes a lot easier instead of just being that everyday pass fail, which I think a lot of people struggle with.
You bet, yeah. So that's looking at diet through the lens of the principles around trying to do better 80% of the time. Through the Pareto Principle, it's very much about thinking about the 20% of dietary habits that are contributing to the 80% of your health benefits. And I
Mm-hmm.
love this principle for diet and for fitness because the people we're talking to, the people that we just want to be 80% better. We don't need to be 100% better. We're not trying to get on a bodybuilding stage. We're not trying to live to 150. If we can live better to 90 years old, that's enough for me. I think it's enough for you. I think it's probably enough for most of the people that are listening to this podcast. And so that almost simplifies it further, right? Like it's about the big rocks. Stop stop obsessing over these little things that you can do that live outside of that 20% of better dietary habits and choices that you can make, and think about what are the most impactful ones, right? A number of them you already mentioned. Prioritizing wholer foods, so the stuff that you actually have to cook in your kitchen. Reducing your consumption of processed foods, processed sugar, the thing that you can just pull out of the pantry. Drinking enough water. Like, if you start to get those things right, you will get 80% better. You don't need the supplements. You don't need the crazy fad diets. These are the things that actually matter. They're the things that are more difficult to package, market, and sell. And therefore, you don't see it amplified as being as impactful as it truly is. But big rocks.
Hmm.
Figure out what are the, top 20% of things that I can do to improve my diet, and focus on those, because those are the things that will have the greatest impact.
Yep, exactly. All right. Should we transition to fitness? Okay.
You bet.
So this one is huge for me and something that I see on a daily basis when I'm working one on one with clients. Because you have people come in and they're either in the camp of well, I haven't been doing anything, so I want to go from 0 to 100, and I want to be all in right now because I need to make up for lost time. Or you have people that are coming in and they're like, I've been doing all of this stuff and it's just not working. I don't know, what the problem is. And with both of them, what a lot of times the best thing that we can do with these people is just pull back, and instead of looking at 100% of the exercises that we have at our disposal, all of the different exercises that we can do and the movements that are going to help them, you know, in the long run, we pull it back to the 20% that we can get really, really good at, that we need to get really good at. And then from there, we can move out, and that will benefit all of the other stuff that we're trying to do. And so, when I think about this, it's a lot of like those compound moves, some like the bigger rocks. We think about, the squat, the hinge, push, pull, lunge, carry. We think about those six movements and just really try to simplify everything that we're doing in the gym so that, all that the other 80% really can just be like that's just icing on the cake. But we're starting with that foundational 20.
Yeah, you see this all the time with fitness. People find some motivation. Like you noted, they go nuts, 100%, dive off the deep end, go crazy at it for a few weeks, and it either isn't sustainable, so they quit, or they overtrain and they aren't seeing the results that they want. And really, the Pareto principle here, the 20% that's going to yield the 80% of results, is to strength train a couple days a week and walk a bit more. Like, it really, those are the big rocks. Get a little stronger, figure out how to get a little stronger, figure out how to move your body a little more. And it is actually that simple. Like, again, way harder to package, to market, to sell, but at the end of the day, those are the things that matter to looking better, to feeling better, to moving better, to all of the types of things you're trying to realize when you're talking about the benefits of fitness. That's really what it's about. You don't need the crazy hit training. You don't need the special classes. You don't need the special program. Progressively overload your muscles and walk. Like, at the end of the day, that is the 20% that'll yield the 80% of results. With regards to trying to get like the 80% right, getting it right 4 out of every 5 times with regards to fitness, it's important to note that like not every workout's going to be great. Like, there are days where I show up in the gym and I'm tired, and maybe I don't progressively overload that day. Like, it just didn't happen for me. That's okay. That's a reality. And some days I don't want to go to the fucking gym, but I do. I put on my shoes, I lace them up, and I go. So it doesn't have to be perfect there either. And I think it's also worth noting that like people who are striving for 100% every single time, they're either professionals, they're on steroids,
Yeah.
or they're overtraining.
Right.
Like honestly, for the regular person, the way to achieve max benefit, like 100% benefit, is probably like to figure out how to get it right 80% of the time.
Yeah.
And even I'd go as far as to say, like, to some degree, to give 80% effort. Like you should certainly give everything here and there. But a lot of times that just leads to overtraining. And so this doesn't have to be as complicated as we're often told. And it's easy, but don't fall for the stuff you see on social media, the marketing from the super fit guy or girl. This is so much simpler.
I don't know why this popped in my head, but when you were talking about the big, the big rocks, it had me thinking about, like when you see, like in like my 600-pound life, and the 600-pound person is starting to get back in shape. So they are only able to do one thing. They can move their legs. They move their legs. Oftentimes, they're being like supported above a treadmill, or they have some sort of pedal system where they can move their legs. But they are so removed from their fitness that the only rock that they can move is moving their legs, walking, pedaling, whatever it is, and it works. And they
Yeah.
keep going, and it continues to work. It never stops working. And sometimes, as capable people, as people that can do a bunch of stuff in the gym and want to do a bunch of stuff in the gym, sometimes the best thing that we can do is just take away all of the extra thought out of it. We're just going to
Mhm.
do simple moves. All I need to do is be consistent, show up to the gym, and it's not always going to be easy, but if I just get in there and can just move, and 80% of the time, that's all I really need to do. Show up with a plan and execute on that plan. Now, 20% of the time, I need to get after it a little bit, because that is, where you're going to get the 80% of those results. But 80% of the time at the gym, if you're showing up with a plan and executing on that plan, it does not have to be at max effort, and you're going to see progress. And sometimes I think we just have to remember that we have to take some of the pressure out of each and every session, and understand that just by being here and just by doing something similar to what we did last week, if our numbers are just in the ballpark of last week's, we are, we're doing good today. And then there are going to be the days where we knock it out of the park. But it does not mean when that doesn't happen that that's a failure.
For this rule to work for people with regards to fitness, it's really important that they come into the fitness journey understanding that it is a lifelong pursuit. And so you see this all the time too. Like people, they work out, they're getting results, but they're not super obvious, or they're not fast enough, and therefore they quit. Like you talked about my 600-pound life or whatever. You look at like the relapse, for lack of a better term, rate with people that were on like The Biggest Loser. It's insanely high. Like it's crazy high. And so you have to go into this knowing that the progress may not be as fast as getting on some 30-day plan, but over time those results will show up, and it will stick, and it will be sustainable, and it will make you healthier, not for 3 months, but for 30 years or however long it is. So that's critically important here, right? Like this is a journey. It's a long pursuit, but it's the pursuit that works. It's the only pursuit that works. Figuring out the 20%, the most impactful things you can do from where you're at today. And if that means moving your feet, or if it means, strength training another day a week, so be it. We can meet you where you are. You should meet yourself where you're at. But yeah, this is the way. This is absolutely the way. It's the way I do it. And this, I'm saying that as a person who did everything else before that and it never worked, right? Like it was up, down, up, down, up, down with my health and fitness for a long time, until I settled in here, until I realized like you don't need to look nuts. Like it's okay. These results will come over time. And so there's a mental piece to this, right? Like you have to come to terms with that going in, and then this works better than any.
Exactly. I mean, it's one of those things where we put so much pressure on going all out and seeing the best results possible. And if you start playing the long game, and I think that's really you know what the 80-20 rule is. It's playing the long game, because you're understanding that it's impossible to go all out forever. And so you're
Mhm.
giving yourself those built-in opportunities to recover, to rest, to change things up, and just like listen to your body, because you're going to run into plateaus, you're going to run into dips in motivation, and understanding that it's not all or nothing is such a freeing feeling when it comes to
And
your to your health.
and to be a normal fucking human being
Yeah,
too. Like,
exactly.
like have a beer, dude. Chill out. Like it's gonna be life is short. Enjoy it a little bit. Figure out how to extend it. Figure out how to feel a little better while you're living it. That's what this is about.
Hmm.
It's not about, looking like some crazy bodybuilder. It's not about those things, right? It's about the basics, the better basics.
Fuck yeah.
The last one we wanted to talk about through this kind of lens is about mindset and like taking care of ourselves and recovering, which is really critically important. And you can certainly apply these principles to mental health, to recovery, to taking care of ourselves. And I think first I want to talk about the Pareto Principle first because I think people get this way wrong.
Yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
and again, this is about identifying the 20% of things you can do for better mindset and recovery
I'll give
that
you a
will yield
hint. It's not
80% of the
more
results.
magnesium supplements.
And it's not a supplement.
Yeah.
It's not some, woo-woo meditation thing you do on the internet. Not that those things can't help, right? But that falls outside of this 20% that we're talking about. And that's where people go first a lot of the times.
Exactly.
Like, I'm sore, I'm stressed. And so they look to these things that fall outside of that 20%. And those things that fall outside of the 20% can't really even work optimally until you get the 20% right.
Yeah.
And
And
most of what lives in that 20%, and we've talked about this before, is sleep.
sleep, it's it. Like,
Sleep is so important
yeah.
for all of these things. And we're constantly looking for other things, other things, other things. Cuz life is busy and, there's all sorts of stimulating things we can be doing into the late hours of the night. And so sleep is easy to sacrifice. But sleep is so critically important. So what are the 20% of things that we can do that'll yield 80% of the results when it comes to mental health, to well-being? It's regular sleep. It's the basic stress management techniques.
Yeah.
It's the taking a pause to tell yourself you're okay, to chill the fuck out. We've talked about that before. Excuse me, before. It's maybe some breathing techniques, maybe some meditation, but it's not these outlandish, crazy things that people are constantly promoting and people are constantly turning to as these easy fixes.
Yeah, it's pretty simple for that. It's sleep and spend time in nature or just like somewhere
Right.
peaceful.
Yeah.
It doesn't, just somewhere that's not,
Get off your phone.
yeah, on your phone looking at social media and, you know, just consuming, just be present more. And if you do those two things, if you sleep close to 8 hours a night and you are present more often than you're not, then you can start to talk. We can talk about your magnesium levels, or like blue light, and any of these other like fun, kind of like supplements and hacks and things. But if you are complaining about how stressed you are and how you're feeling, and you are you're not getting sleep, and then when you're awake you're just spending it looking at a screen when you could be just letting your mind wander and just being present, then all of this other stuff, the other 80% is a waste of money and a waste of time. So, I think this one, more than anything, is like the most important, you know, 20%, the most important Pareto principle to focus on. And then looking at the other 80/20, so being consistent 80% of the time. Like, of course, sometimes you're going to want to watch a movie right before you go to bed. Sometimes you're going to wake up and you're going to look at your phone and start scrolling and continue your day that way. There are going to be times when you go out and you don't get enough sleep, but 80% of the time you need to make sure that these things are happening. It's not much, but 80% of the time, 4 out of every 5 days, you got to be sure that you're taking care of these big rocks, because over the days, weeks, months, and years, when we think about our mental health and how that translates to our physical health, because it's so much more than just our mental health. It is hard to be physically healthy if your mentals are off. And so, this is something that we end up talking about it every single week, because our podcast is just about giving people the basic messages to live a better life. And this is something that is the most basic of things. Drink water, get sleep, be present. And from
Yeah.
there, everything else can start to fall into place. But you need to take care of those things first.
So to conclude the conversation, I think there's something really impactful that everybody can do. If you're listening to this and you're like, okay, that all makes sense, but what do I do now? I think the best place to start is to inventory all this. Like, I would just take a week and just record my behaviors. How am I eating on a daily basis? What does my fitness look like? How am I sleeping? How's my mindset? How's my recovery? And just write that down for a week and take inventory of where you're at. And then start to think about, okay, that's what last week looked like. How can I tweak this so that 80% of the time I'm making the better decision? And further, what are like the 20%? What are the big rocks? Like, what are the most impactful things I can do to make this better so that I can achieve 80% of the results? And that's a really powerful exercise, taking inventory. It's something that I try to do regularly, whether it's, diet, fitness, whatever it is. Sometimes it's business, it's work, right? Like, you go through a week and you feel like you weren't as productive as you were before. And so you have to sort of take inventory of why not? Like, what got in the way that week? And so I would encourage people, like, if you're listening to this and you're like, I want to commit to something, I'm motivated, I want to dive into something. Don't dive into that crazy thing. Don't go looking for some supplements. Take a week and write down what you're eating, how you're moving, and where your mindset and recovery's at. Objectively, write it down. And then review that at the end of the week and make these little tweaks. And then do it again for a week and make a few more little tweaks. And
Mm-hmm.
over time, all of a sudden, you will be making the better decision 80% of the time. You will be moving the biggest rocks, taking advantage of that 20% that will yield 80% of the results. And you may not look drastically different in the mirror 2 weeks later. You may not feel a million times healthier, but I promise, if you believe in this, if you subscribe to it, and if you follow it long enough, you will find yourself in the place that you want to.
That's what we wanted to talk to the people about. Just the big principles that they can use that are actually going to have an effect on them feeling better, not just today, but for the rest of their lives. So, really well said. I hope that you all enjoyed that conversation. Now we're going to transfer to the question and answer portion of the show. Dylan, this was brought to me by one of our clients, and it was, what is the point of a superset? Do you guys use them?
Hmm.
And so, I have my kind of like long-winded answer about supersets. So before I go off on that, why don't you just tell us your feelings on supersets?
Yeah, I'll let you get in the weeds. I think at a high level, I don't use them that often, and in my opinion, the best way to use them is when you're limited for time. So what a superset is essentially you go from one exercise right into the next exercise, perhaps another exercise, without any rest in between. So if you're going to do, it could be, and I think you'll get into the weeds on kind of how you can leverage sort of different muscle groups to play with this differently. But for example, you could go, straight from a bench press to a bicep curl,
Mm.
or from a tricep press down to a bicep curl, or something like that. But instead of taking a break in between the different exercises, you would do a set of bench press, a set of bicep curl, rest, a set of bench press, a set of bicep curl, rest, without any break between the bench press and the bicep curl. So if you're restricted for time, it can be really quite effective. There's other ways that people will use them. It can certainly be a novel stimulus to your muscle. It can lead to some overtraining. There's some risks that come with it. I think you're probably best suited to get more into the weeds around what they can be used for and where there's maybe some risk to doing them.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. The reason why I use supersets in our programming, for the most part, more often than not, is simply for time saving. And there have been a ton of studies done on supersets. Some show that supersets have the same sort of muscle building potential as conventional sets, and some research says otherwise, that conventional sets are better than supersets because you have the rest in between. So I'm not going to say whether or not I think that they are good for building strength, or necessarily muscle building as compared to conventional sets. But what I know is that if I have 1 hour with a client in the gym, and if I have somebody that likes to talk a little bit, that hour can sometimes fly by. And the best way that we can be efficient with our time is supersets. Or, I know personally, like if I just know I have 30, 40 minutes to get a workout in, I just want to do, like 4 or 5 different moves, I'll do a couple of supersets to just save that time. And so, really, when I think about supersets, there's a bunch of different, more nuanced categories, but I look at them as three different major categories. That is, the first one would be considered an agonist superset. So that's where you're working the same muscle or movement. So that would be like doing a chest press into push-ups, something like that, or pull-ups, and then you're going to do, like a row, some sort of like seated row variation. Then there is the antagonist, which is opposing muscle group. So that would be like a bicep curl into a tricep press down, or push ups into pull ups, where you are working oppositional muscle groups. And then the third is what we'd call like a non competing superset. So that's just where you're working two unrelated muscle groups. Normally, that would just be some sort of like upper lower move. You're doing a bench press, and then you're going to do a squat. And for the second and third, the antagonist and the non-competing, those work really well when we're thinking about saving time. That first one, the agonist one, where you're working the same muscle group back to back, if you see that in programming, that's intentionally done to pound a specific muscle. So if you are looking to get bigger biceps or focus on one particular muscle group, then an agonist superset might be a good way to really hit that muscle group. But you do need to be mindful of overtraining and making sure that you're putting form above everything else. And so that is a pretty advanced technique. But the other two, the antagonist and the non-competing, I really like to use as far as time savers, because there isn't a whole lot of potential for tiring out the specific muscles. Now, when you're doing those antagonist ones, it can feel pretty intense because those muscles are still going through flexion and extension. Like if you do a bicep curl into a tricep press down, your bicep is going through a range of motion the entire time. It's just the load is different, in the two moves. But it's a really good way to get a nice pump and to save a little bit of time. If you are really strapped on time, those non-competing ones can be excellent. If you're going to do squats and then you're going to go right into bench press, that bench press probably isn't going to be as strong as it would if you were just doing it, without having done that squat right before it. But the difference is going to be minimal, and it does a good job of saving time. Now, the thing that you need to be mindful there of is making sure that you're still catching your breath, because the big thing with strength training, in order to progress, is it shouldn't be a cardio workout. You shouldn't be failing because you can't breathe anymore. So if it becomes a cardiovascular problem, then you need to slow down. You need to take some more time between your exercises. But and it actually, if you're able to do these non-competing supersets, then you might need to up the intensity on some of these moves too. Because I know if I do a set of barbell back squat and then try to go right into a set of barbell bench, if I'm training close to failure, even with them being totally, unrelated muscle groups, I'm still going to need, at least 30 seconds, probably closer to a minute, just to catch my breath and get my mind right. So these are something that I like to use when I'm short on time. But it's something that you do need to be mindful of how you're mixing them into the program, because it does matter, and it could affect, your recovery, and it could just affect your growth in general.
Yeah, I don't love to use them really ever for compound movements. Like a barbell squat into a bench press, probably not for me. You're right. If you're really stretched for time and they're programmed in there,
But you're right.
you,
It's
you
probably
gotta
best
you
if
gotta do them
you
safely.
probably best if you are using that for moves later on in the workout. Like if
Which
you were going to do some single leg, if you're going to do like single leg RDLs, but you also wanted to do, like a lateral raise or something.
yeah.
Two things that are not, like you said, those compound moves, because you're right. Those should, if you're doing them with the proper level of intensity, they should require your entire focus.
Yeah, if I do use them, it's usually arms at the end of a workout. Like that to your bicep tricep point, I think can be really effectively used that way. So if this is something you're considering, I would encourage you to ensure that it's not something you're doing on your own, that it's programmed in effectively by a knowledgeable trainer. And if you are going to experiment with it some, I would look to more isolation exercises than compound.
Yeah, and if you are able to move that quickly between moves, then instead of stringing them together with a superset, you may find more value out of upping the intensity on those
Hmm.
particular movements so that you actually require the rest afterwards.
You bet.
Okay. Time to transition to the final segment of the show. It's everybody's favorite. It is the I Lift a sad song of the week. Dylan, it is your song this week, so hit us with it.
Yeah, this was a jam for us for a little while. It's one of those songs when it comes on, it's got a lot of nostalgia to it. It just brings back memories of a very specific period of time in my life, and it's also just a gym banger. And it's Always All Right by the Alabama
That's
Shakes.
a great song. Great song. Oh yeah, I mean, I can remember a number of times just singing that song at the top of our lungs. Great one, and we've got. I'm going to see you in a couple weeks. Big golf tournament coming up.
Oh yeah, man. It's 2 weeks away. When's the last time you played golf?
Uh, I played 9 holes at the beginning of the summer, but the last time I
All
played
right.
18 was last summer with you guys.
I'm in form right now, my friend.
Oh, that's going to be awesome! I can't wait to see you.
And
All
and,
right,
and
everybody.
if the
Well,
hey, I just want to say to you while you're here,
okay.
uh, if the golf's not good, make sure you've banked up that 20% to make some bad decisions because that weekend we are going to eat like shit and drink.
The Packers play
Friday
opening
night.
week 1 Friday night in
Yes,
Brazil.
sir.
It's going to be amazing. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much for listening. We'll see you next time.